Can you hear me? Great. So thank you so much. You've just watched a very powerful set of short films, and we have our panelists here to guide us through some of the topic areas and perhaps answer some questions from you. I'd like now to introduce Dr. Lynn Roberts, my highly accomplished friend and moderator of this evening's panel discussion. Professor Roberts is a faculty member in the Department of Community Health and Social Sciences here at CUNY Graduate School of Public Health and Health Policy. She has a Bachelor of Science in Human Development from Howard University and a PhD in Human Services Studies from Cornell University. CUNY has been Lynn's academic home since 1995. Prior to that, Lynn oversaw the development, implementation, and evaluation of several prevention programs for women and youth in New York City. Her current teaching and scholarship focuses on the impact of models of collaborative inquiry and teaching on civic and political engagement. In 2004, she and others formed a coalition of environmental activists and members of the Native American and African American community to preserve a burial ground located along the Hackensack River in Teaneck, New Jersey, where she lives, and where the Lenape Indians and enslaved Africans are buried. Please welcome Professor Roberts. Thank you so much. Is that good? Okay. So thank you, Grace, and I am going to introduce our two guests, and we have one panelist who was not able to be with us, but I'm going to also introduce her or bring her into the room and share a statement. She had a family emergency and couldn't be with us, otherwise she would have been happy to join us. So first I'm going to introduce, you introduced yourself earlier, John, but I'm going to reiterate it for the purposes of the film.
Give us the brief version.
Yes, I'll do my best, but forgive me if I say more. John Bowermaster is a writer, filmmaker, and adventurer, and a 6-time grantee of the National Geographic Expeditions Council, one of the Society's Ocean Heroes, and his first assignment for National Geographic magazine was documenting a 3,741-mile crossing of the Antarctica by dog sled. He has written a dozen books and produced and directed 20 documentary films, most recently After the Spill, Louisiana Water Stories, and Dear President Obama, The Clean Energy Revolution Is Now, which happened to be produced and narrated by actor and advocate Mark Ruffalo. His current film projects include The Ghost Fleet, which looks at the global issue of fishing slaves, a 6-part series for Vice.com, Clean Water Wars, and the web series that we just viewed, The Hudson, a River at Risk. He lives in New York's Hudson Valley. So I welcome you. And I'll go ahead and introduce our second panelist as well before we get into our discussion. Gil Hawkins is Vice President of the Hudson River Fishermen's Association, which is a group of recreational fishermen who make active use of the New York Bight and the surrounding water system and are concerned with the present and future state of these fisheries. Their objectives are to encourage the responsible use of our aquatic resources and protection of habitat. They assist where possible use of aquatic resources, They assist where possible in efforts to abate pollution and promote sport fishing and the management of that recreation. Gil is also an award-winning sculptor who earned his Bachelor's of Fine Art from the Philadelphia College of the Arts, now known as the University of the Arts, and he's also studied at the New School for Social Research and the Art Student League here in New York City. He's held several teaching and artist-in-residence positions, including with the New Jersey Meadowlands Commission, which was a regional zoning, planning, and regulatory agency in northern New Jersey, which existed between 1969 and 2015, I believe, until it was legislatively merged with another organization. I won't go into those details unless he cares to share them. So thank you both for joining us, and I will briefly just tell you about our missing panelist, just because she's a highly regarded colleague, and this is certainly an area of interest to her, and as I said, if she could be here, she would be. She is in our Health Policy and Management program of the CUNY Graduate School of Public Health and Health Policy, Elizabeth Geltman. And Dr. Geltman is a lawyer with over 30 years experience in public health law and environmental health policy. She's the author of 17 books on environmental and natural resources policy. She serves as the Secretary of the Environment Section of the American Public Health Association, and she earned her Master's of Law degree from Georgetown University Law Center and her Juris Doctor from the University of Baltimore School of Law. So I think I will, before introducing both of you, just share her statement, if you gentlemen don't mind. And I think it's a good highlight of both, I guess, her response to the films, but also some exciting news, kind of to lift us up a little bit from what we've just watched. So Elizabeth, and I'm going to read verbatim, says, "Thank you for inviting me to participate on this panel and comment on these important films. I'm happy to announce that the CUNY School of Public Health was awarded a Superfund training grant that will allow the CUNY community to address some of the issues highlighted in the film. This new National Institutes of Health funded center will focus on environmental and occupational health issues from Superfund sites contaminated with PCBs, radon, and soil vapor intrusion. Sites like those featured in the film. We will conduct research and provide training on emerging technologies for better cleanups that provide greater protection to human health and the environment. We encourage students and faculty to get involved in this important endeavor. As a first step, this fall, the new center will sponsor a course on environmental and social justice. We have tuition scholarships available so 8 students can take the course free of charge. An important focal of the course will be case studies from local Superfund sites. With regard to oil trains, I'd like to take a moment to let you think about the root cause of oil trains and barge traffic through New York. The crude being transported is coming from the Bakken in North Dakota to the port of Albany. The root cause of the path through our state is a permit granted to allow the export crude oil from the port of Albany. Until recently, the U.S. had more import than export terminals. Most U.S. terminals are now applying to convert import facilities to become export facilities. That means protecting public health and safety from increased oil train traffic and potential derailments will require examining permits issued by the Department of Energy to allow export of crude oil and examining Department of Transportation standards for cars used to ensure safe carriage of crude. The American Public Health Association, which has been an important advocate of health in all policies movement, it's important to point out that efforts to protect public health will increasingly be found in policy venues not considered public health's prototypical domain. But addressing the root cause of public health dangers demands that public advocacy consider a wider venue of action. So, with that, I'm going to turn first to our filmmaker, John, to kind of open this up, spend, I think we have about 8 minutes still, do we? 5? Is it changed?
I think, let's see, what time do we have?
Still about 5 minutes or so, maybe, or longer. But tell us about the film. Tell us what led you to this specifically. I know you've done a lot of documentary film on oceans and come to the Hudson. I know it's your home, but if you give us some overview of your vision for the project and what your hopes are for what your films will lead us to.
Yeah, the kind of motivator for these films was 2 things. One is that I have made lots of films about the relationship between man and water around the world, but I live here in the Hudson Valley, and I just find the Hudson River and its history, both its history of you know, activism and pollution is very compelling. But we set out to make short films. I think, you know, the films we watched were ranged from 5 minutes to 13 minutes, and we wanted to put them online. We wanted to make them available because we really want to share them as much as possible. There's nothing precious about like holding them back and preserving them. We want to get them out there. But we didn't really set out with a grand purpose. The Bomb Trains movie was the first one we made, and the New York Times picked it up and pushed it around the globe, literally, which was interesting. And then we just fell into a pattern where we were making one of these short films every couple of months, and it pretty quickly emerged that they all had one thing in common. And we watched 5 of them now, but there are another 7 or 8 online at HudsonRiverAtRisk.com. But the one binding element in all of them was what? The river, energy, and fossil fuel energy. And that's why your colleague's point is very apt. I mean, what's happened, and we didn't see this coming. I was quite involved in the effort to ban fracking in New York State, and I think while we were patting ourselves on the back for that success, we stopped paying attention just briefly, and all of a sudden the Hudson Valley turned into this corridor for moving fossil fuel up and down by pipeline and barge and train. But the one thing your colleague didn't mention specifically is one thing that changed under the Obama administration was it was a legislative change that allowed for the first time the export of crude oil by the United States to other countries. So this notion of these fossil fuels, this fossil fuel boom, thanks to fracking, being, bringing us to some kind of energy independence in America is simply false, because most of this crude oil that we're seeing move through the Hudson Valley is not staying in New York. Most of it's not even staying in the United States. It's headed for Africa and South America and China. And you heard in these films one line repeated. We have all the risks and none of the benefits. I mean, there's nothing, as this stuff passes through, there's nothing gained really. Even at the transfer of the fuel, the fossil fuel into the big tanks in Albany and into the barges, the fee that is charged is nominal. It's nominal. So there's no win here for New York State. You also saw these horrific pictures of what happens when those trains go off the track and what happens. Just yesterday, there was an explosion of a natural gas pipeline in a Denver suburb. I think in the suburbs of Denver, there are 60,000 miles of natural gas pipelines, and exploded and obliterated a house. So, and the notion that we have a gas pipeline running next to, it's not even 1,500 feet, it's 500 feet from a nuclear power plant is phenomenal. But why we haven't harassed the governor enough to make him close the nuclear plant before now is amazing. The one little add-on that I don't think is in this version of the film is that they have announced that in 2020 and 2021 they're going to close Indian Point. We shall see. We shall see. It's one of those that could change with a different governor. It could change if the company is sold. It could change if it's not proven that there's enough alternative energy to replace the energy provided by the nuclear plants. So, to me, it's still a work in progress.
60-year period that the decommission can happen, and that's a lot of wiggle room.
Decommission could last.
I mean, even beyond, but where they're supposed to have their plan in place, right? So the 2-year, 2012 doesn't seem very. Well, 2021.
Yeah, but the decommissioning, no one has successfully decommissioned a nuclear power plant in the United States ever. So I don't know why anyone would think that Indian Point was going to be the first.
Thank you for that. And Gil, perhaps your reactions to the film and how they relate to your work.
The Hudson River Fishermen's Association was started back in 1966. So we're in our 51st anniversary, and it was started by a bunch of fishermen who had had enough. They tried to take their shad, to the Fulton Fish Market, and they were turned away. The reason why they were turned away was because the fish smelled of industrial oil. That industrial oil was coming from the Penn Central yard in Croton. From that point on, this small band of fishermen led by Bob Boyle started an incredible movement on the Hudson River. 15 years later, the Riverkeeper organization was started on the basis of the Hudson River, from the Hudson River Fishermen's Association. We have been active on the river, and the reason why we've been active is because we fish the river. We understand and see the river. John Linscomb, that you saw in a good friend of mine, is on the river every day, and he sees us day in and day out. And his information and his practical knowledge of what's going on in the river is very, very important. The problem that's happening these days, and your films are wonderful, by the way, the problem is that they're becoming old news as soon as they're made. And I hate to criticize them because they're so good, but the fact is that our media these days is looking for the car crash. Our media is looking for that news that's going to break in, that is going to be able to say, this is hot news, you have to see this. The problem is, people don't care that much about the river. The river is beautiful, it's free, the energy that comes from the river is free. Industries say, wow, look at all this power, it's free. Look at this space, it's free. Who in the world would ever think that you could put 100 or 200 barges on the river? Can you imagine if you did that at some mall and turned around and said, all right, well, we're going to move some trucks in here because we have to move some Bakken oil down. No, you can't do that. Well, the Hudson River is free. There's anchorage there. You could do that right underneath the Palisades, right where ospreys take fish out of the river. That doesn't make any difference. Out of sight, out of mind. The concept is it's not in the media, therefore nobody cares about it. I will challenge you or anybody else on the river on a weekend to try, or on a weekday I should say, to go to some of these communities along the river that chase people away because of the commuter parking lots. That commuter parking lot is full of steel. It sits there from 5 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock at night, full of steel, and there are signs up all over the place saying no parking or permit parking or resident parking. That's your river. So even if you wanted to get to the river, you couldn't do it. If you wanted to drop a line in the river, you couldn't do it. These are hot issues. These are issues that affect you. And the important thing is that people are just looking at the river and saying, wow, it's a beautiful river. That has been one of the problems with the Hudson River for many, many years, going all the way back to the Hudson River School of Painting. And that was, it's always been a bucolic river hiding all of its secrets. The secrets are the PCB-laden mud that sits in the marinas that can't be dredged because it's toxic fill. You can't take the mud out of the marinas and put it somewhere because it's laden with PCBs. The river that hides the pharmaceuticals that are flowing through the sewage treatment plants, the estrogens, all the pharmaceuticals that you take that go through your system and go into the sewage treatment plants, go into the river and go into the ecosystem and change the ecosystem. We should be looking very, very carefully at that. But we can't, because we have things like barges, and we have things like pipelines, and we have people who want to abuse and change the river because it's profitable. That's the kind of things that are coming up. Those are the kinds of things that we always have to watch out for. Now, drive across the river, you drive across one of the many, many bridges on the river. I was involved with the Tappan Zee Bridge, and the building of the Tappan Zee Bridge for many years. It's all great, but you can't stop and see the river. Several years ago, I was in a meeting of engineers. There had to be 40 or 50 engineers talking about exactly the concept of the Tappan Zee Bridge and how it was going to cross the river. And I stood up and I said, do you realize that you cannot walk across the Tappan Zee Bridge? And they all stopped and looked and said, wait a minute, there's no, holy cow, he's right.
And you're still not going to be able to, right?
No.
Even though they're rebuilding it?
No, because when I sat there in that meeting, I said, you got to put a walkway in. And they are going to put a walkway in. So this is the kinds of things that when you go down to the river and you enjoy the river, you fish it, you have a picnic next to the river, you see what's going on. These are the things that make people want to clean up the river and make it part of their lives. As it is right now, it's just a thought in your head. It's the Hudson River. As you said earlier, you can only see it through the gaps in the buildings and the streets. Go down and smell the river. Go down and look and see what's in the river, whether there's...
Don't go down and smell it after it's just rained, though.
Well, that's because of the CSOs.
Yeah, one of the biggest problems in one of the films we're going to make here in the coming years is simply called, in polite terms, no poop. Because, as Gil's mentioning, you know, the real dirty little secret about the Hudson River is its biggest pollution today is sewage overflow. If it rains just a quarter of an inch in New York City, all of that wastewater that runs down the streets causes the sewage system to overflow, and there are legal exits for this raw sewage to go into the Hudson on a billions of pounds a year basis.
Here's another.
Have a sewage treatment plant on our end.
At 125th Street, and 125th Street, that was famous. And you know, people used to, in the old days, catch huge striped bass. And I'll explain why. Because what we think of as waste, in many ways, or you know, is just part of a river system. I'm not talking about just human waste, but I'm talking about a river system. And the river system, everybody sees this as a bottle of clean water. And yet, when I talk to students, I say, could fish live in this bottle of clean water? And they say, sure, it's clean water. This is what clean water is supposed to be. No, actually, clean water is a pollutant. Because clean water will not support fish life. But what happens is, when you put water through a nuclear reactor, or when you put it through an electric plant, you heat it to 80 degrees, and then you put it out into the river, it no longer has any bacteria in it, it no longer has any of the things in it that make a river and an estuary rich, full of food, and it comes out like this, and this is a pollutant. And at 80 degrees, you walk through this room into another room, if you were a young fish, that 80 degrees would have you sweating pretty quickly, and you wouldn't be able to live in that 80 degree room. So pollutants come in many different forms, and it's not just human waste. It could be tremendously clean water, or it could be superheated water, or it could be radiated water, or it could or water that is leaking, radiation is leaking into water. And everybody who turns around and looks at this ecosystem has to understand that this is in a very, very, very careful balance. The leaves that come down from the river in the fall will turn the river red. It's a wonderful sight to see. Because of autumn, you look at the leaves and you say, gee, isn't it nice? Well, look at the river from State Line Lookout, for example, and you'll see that it changes color. Or the tides, and when the tides come in the river, you can actually see. Last year, I was sitting on the top of the Palisades watching bunker, menhaden fish that were swimming up the river. I could see them 400 feet in the air. And what was chasing them? A whale. A whale north of the George Washington Bridge in the Hudson River. That's when we say the river is in balance, when you start to see that. And when you start to get the PCBs out of the mud, and you start to say this river will come back. And this is the kind of the things that gives you hope about the river. The river has huge striped bass, many, many different kinds of fish. The estuary is rich. It's very rich. We just have to get the industrial pollutants out.
John, thank you for that, passion.
He's someone who obviously spends time on the river, which there aren't enough people.
Which brings me to a point, because it isn't as visible or accessible to the majority of New Yorkers. They are in a stone's throw, as you said, to the waterways. How do you keep the momentum? And you made a point earlier about mobilization to ban fracking, considered a huge success by most countries, right, in the country. And yet it seems that you think of the string of films that you created, how could that, do people think that the job was done and they kind of, stop thinking about other ways because there's so much connection to the same issues? It would seem that you could tap into that again. And how are your films, which each one of them has a directive at the end to what you can do, how to get involved. But how can you keep each of the issues that each of the separate films raise kind of into a larger, picture of scheme of how we do that?
There are, on each of these issues, there are dedicated grassroots activists chasing it, for sure. I mean, what we learned from that fracking effort was that the change came from the ground up. The reason the fracking was banned primarily was because by the time in December of 2014, when the decision was made, there were 175, 180 communities across the state that had already banned fracking within their borders. And it wasn't, some were small towns, but it included Syracuse and Buffalo and Albany. And so the governor and his team knew that if they were to allow it, they were going to get sued the next day by these 175, 180 communities that already had bans, which showed that same kind of thing can happen in regard to pipelines. It can happen potentially in regard to this anchorage issue. In New York State, 30 communities have already said in regard to these proposed anchorages, we don't want that. And in the pipeline fight on the Pilgrim pipeline, the twin pipelines that would run one down to Linden, New Jersey from Albany and carrying crude oil, and one carrying refined product back. There are, in New York State alone, there's 25 plus communities that have said we don't want this, and in New Jersey, another 20 communities who've said we don't want this. So that is an indices that there are lots of people out there who want to get involved, but when you take a step back and remind yourself that you're fighting the biggest companies in the world, the energy providers, it's a monumental effort. The other pipeline story that we focused on, the Ames-Spectra pipeline, has not turned out so well for those residents who live nearby. It's turned on. Natural gas is pumping through that pipe right now, and they fought hard. But it was difficult to take on the energy industry because they've got deep pockets.
Well, if I might add, one of the great success stories was the Rockland Water Coalition that went after a desalination plant that was supposed to be put in by Suez in Haverstraw, and that got reversed. That was on fast track and could have happened within months. And the battle came down over a 3 or 4 year period of time, and the Rock and Water Coalition won that case. So there are ways to do this and to get involved. But I think, if I might answer your question a little bit more, and that is that at any time you should not be scared away from the Hudson River, and that you shouldn't say, all right, well, I'm not going to go down and dip my feet in the river, or I'm not going to experience the river, or that it's tremendously polluted, as if your feet and toenails are going to fall off because you put your... this is a huge river system, and there are problems with the river system. And by the way, there will always be people out there who are going to try to take advantage of that power and the freeness of the river. There are always going to be people that, and that's why we have watchdog groups like the Hudson River Fishermen's Association, Scenic Hudson, Clearwater, Riverkeeper, and the NRDC. All of these groups work very hard to make sure that the direction of the river is going in the right way.
When we got ready to screen these films for the public, we researched Hudson groups that work on environmental issues up and down the Hudson. More than 300, easily more than 300.
Absolutely.
I'm thinking also how many. Maybe this is also a New York bias.
Yeah.
Maybe again because of the more of a removal from proximity to the river.
Not being able to get as close to it as many would like. We said earlier during a break that there aren't many access points within New York City's limits, although it's abutted by water, right, as many islands. But many New Yorkers, myself included, and New Jerseyans, have been very supportive in efforts to, fight or challenge the Keystone XL and the North Dakota pipeline. But this is right here, like they can drive or take a train to get, to the Hudson, and yet I don't, what you share about the pipeline, about the AIM expansion and the Pilgrim pipeline seems so ripe for letting people know, and those are offshoots even of the other pipelines, right?
Well, there's some
they're
interesting
transporting from those areas, although it's more of a bypass, I guess, for New York.
There's some interesting legislation in New Jersey, for example. Any tidal waterway has to have a walkway along its shores. And can you imagine if they made that legislation in New York State, and you had to have a walkway along the Hudson River from its full length, tidal at least to the Troy Dam? Now there's some really good aspects to access. The problem is that once you get down to where as you get closer to the water, the real estate gets more expensive. And as that real estate gets more expensive, it's only those people who can afford that real estate. And that's why we need parks like the Palisades Interstate Park System and other parks all up and down the river. And we need to support those parks. Public access is very, very important.
We've been filming in and around New York City the last couple months, and last week we were out in Greenpoint, off of Greenpoint in Brooklyn, and the Bushwick Inlet. And they just near the Bushwick Inlet, they built these beautiful kind of elevated walkways over the river. You can walk out over the river, but the river is 20 feet below you. You can't get to it. Just near there, there's an old wreck of a barge, and it has a bar on it, literally called like the barge bar. Mm-hmm. But you can't access it from the water. No. So if you drive your boat up to it, they shoo you away. Exactly. And the reason it was explained to us, the reason is that the cities and developers are so scared of liability issues that they don't want to give anyone access for fear they'll put their toes in the water, or they'll fall in, or God knows what they think is going to happen to them.
But let's also not forget the public trust doctrine, which says that from the low tide line to the high tide, anybody in the country and the world is allowed. That the river belongs to you. The river doesn't belong to the industry. It doesn't belong to government. The river belongs to you, and that's stated very clearly in the public trust doctrine, which is a doctrine that goes all the way back to Justinian in Roman times, and has been fought over for years and years and years. But the world's rivers basically are or should be in with the public trust doctrine, but American rivers are, and all tidal waters. So one of the things that happens is denying access has a liability to it for those people who deny access. And a good example of that is the Gold Coast in Edgewater, which is right across the river from 125th Street. And that is that people want to build their condominiums right up to the edge of the water. And with the river walkway and that legislation, they can't do that. So there's some good things that are happening on the river, and we don't want to always paint the river as being a bad or ugly situation. One of the things that happens with the river is just like a handsome person or a good-looking woman or a good-looking man who has a little blemish on their face. You know, they're still a good-looking person, but, you know, you want to sort of, you know, make sure that, hey, or the, you know, the old joke about spinach on the teeth. Well, we always concentrate on that sort of spinach on the teeth kind of situation rather than in the Hudson River. But the fact is that it is a beautiful river, and it's very attractive, and it has incredible recreational capabilities. And those are things that we should use and shouldn't be afraid to use.
And this series of short films is called the River at Risk.
Yes.
But we are already at work on the Hope on the Hudson section.
Yeah.
And it starts out on a beautiful piece, so we've made focused on the sloop Clearwater, which has been under renovation and restoration and is back on the water now. And then this piece about the New York City as a city on the water, which focuses on the fact that, as you suggested, there's 520 miles of waterfront in New York City, and 4 of the 5 boroughs are islands. And it focuses on all this incredible activism that's going on the waterways around New York City.
We hold 6 or 7 events during the summer, or from spring to fall, actually, of children's catfish contests, where we invite children through different organizations to come out and fish for catfish during the summer. All of these are catch and release, and the kids come out. We provide all the fishing poles and all of the, and at the end, those kids who are really very much interested in what's going on and show some real love for the river, walk away with a fishing pole. And it's the Johnny Appleseed kind of concept that, you know, if you teach a child how to fish, they will be able to fish for the rest of their lives, and they will protect the river and the waters that they fish in. And that's very important. We've also scheduled a couple of events with Wounded Warriors. So we'll be able to have the Wounded Warriors come down to the river and fish with their families, or in one event, compete themselves to catch catfish and enjoy the river, enjoy its recreational capability.
Like both increasing public's awareness of the beauty, but also of the risk, so that they can protect that beauty.
And access. Access is key. I mean, if you can't get to the river, I mean, there's a town, Dobbs Ferry. I'm very easily. I will say that I went down to Dobbs Ferry the other day in the parking lot. I was afraid to get out of my car. You know Dobbs Ferry. You live in Dobbs Ferry, so you know exactly what's going on there. And in fact, there's, 500 cars parked there from 5 in the morning to and lots full. 20 spots for recreation. And 20 spots for recreation. I mean, there's a story there that they do through careful manipulation of ordinances, local ordinances, and minimal parking, it's been a long time that people have actually limited people from getting to the river by limited parking, either parking parking meters that last for 2 hours, for example, or, but they've carefully manipulated their ordinances so that people will not want to come and use their, and thank you for backing up my allegation here, but it's absolutely true.
Well, I realized, or at times, that we didn't open it up badly about that. We had, a nice
That's our
close-knit
passion.
group, but I want to thank you both for your films. They are informative, rather sobering, and short, and that makes them a good
to the point.
and to the point. Yes.
You could take any of those subjects and stretch it into a 45-minute film, but I think there's a lot of power in getting on and off the screen.
And they should be useful tools for
Education,
for
for sure.
education.
And we may soon get, we will definitely get Gil's car wreck attention, to these issues, because just 3 weeks ago a train went off the tracks, derailed in Newburgh.
Right.
It was not a bomb train, but it was using the same trains and it went off the rails because a construction crew was moving a piece of equipment over the rails slowly. And 1 week later, a barge carrying gasoline ran aground just off of Catskill, and ran aground in the muck, not in the rocks, but in the muck. And but it was carrying gasoline, not crude oil. But this stuff happens all the time, and just statistically, one of them is going to be a bad accident.
The rail line that we've been talking about, people don't know it. Google Earth that rail line and just follow it down. You'll see that 3/4 of a mile of that goes under our military academy. Goes through under very, very important buildings and goes right through through the military academy of West Point. Very few people know that, but if there was an accident, and when you Google Earth, you'll also notice how well manicured the tracks are. Almost every stone is in place as if it were a Lionel, and that's because they don't want anything to go wrong. But
at the same time, the bridge abutments that many of those trains run over are crumbling.
Crumbling.
Yeah. We need that $1 trillion infrastructure program to help repair some of those. They were never built for this kind of traffic.
And it may sound a little bit extreme, but one of the things that I've recognized and I continue to recognize is we have a certain amount of pride in this country about our environment. And we've had this incredible national concept of protecting this country. And yet we haven't put that protection towards our environment. And I'm on a very strong campaign to say that, in truth, pollution is treason. And I feel very strongly about that.
On that note, and that's certainly significant given we're up against it. Since many of these films were completed, things have changed dramatically. Regulation and not that we didn't have a lot of challenges before, so the road ahead.
It was hard enough fighting a guy we did like.
Yes. To have so many of the special interests in the administration, even more so.
Well, America wants a clean environment. They want clean air. They want clean water. They want clean land. They don't want. There's nobody would even be fighting with that idea. There's no competition between industry. Industry has the great capability of spending money and making money by providing clean services to this country. If you went to a Dairy Queen and there was garbage all over the place, and there was food all over the floor, you wouldn't eat there. Well, we don't want that with our industry either. You don't want spills. You don't want smoky stacks. We don't.
I'm sure no New Yorker
Absolutely.
About letting them know that that's possible.
We've got to take a little bit more pride.
Well, thank you both for joining us. And again, any last comments on where people can access the film and get information to all of those wonderful links at the end for what they can do?
Well, certainly you can look at these films and others at HudsonRiverRisk.com. But the other thing is, as Gil points out, there are easily a half dozen really good environmental groups who do work up and down the river who you should join, follow their web dispatches, both Gil's group and then the Scenic Hudson Riverkeeper in Clearwater and the NRDC and even the Sierra Club up in Albany. I mean, they're doing daily dispatches about what you can do. And at this moment in time, people are truly inspired and asking, what can I do? How can I participate?
And the river, as we see it down here, which is a mile wide, is a very small little bucolic river as we go further up into the watershed. And the watershed is like a huge tree with all its branches reaching out into all the communities up in New York State. There are the Catskills, the Adirondacks, and all those communities, all those people who work to keep their streams nice and clean, and trout streams and beautiful areas. That is all part of the Hudson River watershed, and we shouldn't forget that, especially when we're sitting down here in New York. And they should not forget the up downstream from upstream.
Yeah, I think in so many ways it's a metaphor in public health that we use often.
Yeah.
Both things literally.
Absolutely.
Pay attention upstream as well as downstream.
Right.
And with that said, thank you all who joined us, and especially to Grace and Bajwe for bringing